I still remember that day clearly, how everything started. It was a lazy afternoon, and I was sitting on the couch just scrolling through my phone trying to kill time. I had no plans, nothing special on my mind. I had just come back from a gym and was trying to enjoy my day off. The doorbell rang and I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it was Patrick, my best friend. Patrick and I had known each other for years. We were always there for each other through thick and thin. He was one of the few people I could trust completely. But that day, he seemed different. His usual cocky attitude was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was something almost nervous about him. His eyes were a little wider than usual, and his movements felt almost too quick, like he was holding something back. "Yo, Marcus, can I talk to you for a sec?" he said, leaning against the door frame. "Yeah, man, come in," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in, but instead of his usual casual demeanor, he just stood there, fidgeting with his phone in his hand. It was unlike him. I raised an eyebrow. "Confused everything all right?" I asked, setting my phone down on the table and giving him my full attention. He took a deep breath like he was about to spill something heavy. "I've been seeing someone," he finally said, looking at me seriously. I blinked, surprised. "Wait, what, you seeing someone?" I chuckled, not believing him. At first. Patrick wasn't exactly the type to settle down with anyone. He loved the single life easy, no strings attached. But this time, something was different. "Yeah, man. I met this girl, her name's Carrie, she's great." He continued, his voice quieter now, almost like he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince me. "I really like her, like I'm serious about her." That caught me off guard. "Seriously, you?" I repeated, still trying to process the idea of Patrick being serious about anyone. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. This was different. "Yeah," he nodded, his face flushed a little. "I know it's fast, but I feel a man. She's the one, I'm into her." I didn't know what to say. I had never seen him like this before. It wasn't like Patrick to open up like this, especially about something as serious as a relationship. But he kept talking, pacing in front of me as though he couldn't hold it in any longer. "She's perfect, but I don't know, man. I'm just worried." He said, his hands moving, restless as he spoke. "I need to be sure she's as into me as I am into her. I need you to check her out for me." I blinked, unsure. I heard him correctly. "Wait, what do you mean? Check her out?" Patrick paused, looking at me for a long moment, almost like he was trying to read my face. Finally, he let out a sigh and spoke slowly. "Just, make sure she's not playing me. Make sure she's not seeing someone else or just messing around," he said, sounding almost embarrassed. "I'm serious about this, Marcus, and I trust you." I stared at him for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. This was strange. My best friend was asking me to spy on his girlfriend to see if she was loyal to him. It sounded insane. But at the same time, I knew how much Patrick cared about Carrie. I could see it in his eyes, and I could feel his vulnerability in the way he spoke. I didn't know what to say. It was a weird request, but I also knew that this was Patrick. He wouldn't ask me to do something like this if it wasn't important to him. After a long pause, I finally sighed. "All right, fine. I'll do it, but only because you're my boy." I said, "But this better be worth it, man." Patrick's face lit up with relief. "Thanks, Marcus. I knew you'd get it," he said, his voice softening. I just need to know that I'm not wasting my time." I could tell he was struggling with it. He was terrified of being hurt, and even though he had a tough exterior, I knew this was something that hit him hard. I agreed, but I wasn't entirely sure what I was getting myself into. The next thing I knew, I was planning my mission to meet Carrie. At first, I thought it would just be a casual thing. I get to know her, maybe find out a few things and see if there was anything shady going on. I thought it would be easy, just a little harmless checkup for my friend. But as I prepared to meet her, something in me started to feel uneasy. There was something about this whole thing that didn't sit right with me. I wasn't sure if it was the idea of spying on her or the fact that I was getting involved in something I never planned to be a part of, whatever it was. I knew one thing for sure. I was about to find myself in a situation that would change everything, and I didn't even know it yet. The first time I met Carrie wasn't anything too extraordinary. Patrick had given me the details. She was coming over to a coffee shop in the town center later that week, and he wanted me to show up around the same time to casually bump into them. The plan was simple: observe, talk a little, and see if she acted like someone who was genuinely invested in Patrick, or if she was just in it for the fun of it, as so many people were at our age. I wasn't looking for any drama, but then again I wasn't expecting to be completely caught off guard either. I arrived at the cafe a little early, hoping to get a feel for the place and situation. It was a small local joint, the kind where you could always find a quiet corner and sip on your drink while you read or checked your phone. The sun had just started to dip behind the buildings, casting a warm glow through the large windows. I grabbed the table in the back, trying to make sure I wasn't too obvious. I didn't want to look like I was spying. After all, I wasn't. This was supposed to be casual. I told myself I was just there to meet Patrick and his new girlfriend and get a vibe for the situation when they walked in together. I barely recognized Carrie first. She was shorter than I had imagined from Patrick's stories. Not that height mattered. It was her energy, her confidence. She had a smile that was easy to read, and she wore it like she didn't have a care in the world. Her laugh was light, carefree, and it seemed like she was always the one doing the talking. Patrick, on the other hand, looked a little different too. The usual, easygoing, slightly cocky version of him seemed to have disappeared. He was all smiles, yes, but they didn't seem as effortless. There was something more tender in the way he looked at her. Something I hadn't seen in him before. I stood up when they came in and waved them over, trying to look casual. "Hey guys," I said, keeping the tone of my voice friendly, though there was a slight sense of uneasy deep in my stomach. "How's it going?" "Hey man, good to see you," Patrick said, giving me a handshake. "You looked happier than I'd seen him in a while, but I was looking at Carrie now, try not to be too obvious about it." She smiled at me, and I saw her eyes scan me quickly, assessing me the way people often did when they were trying to figure someone out. She was cute, there was no denying it, but I wasn't here to judge her based on her looks. "Not yet, anyway. Nice to meet you." "Marcus," she said, her voice soft but not shy. She was polite, and her smile made her seem even more approachable. I couldn't help but feel like I'd been set up for some kind of weird test, like I was about to have to choose sides in some unspoken war. We sat down, and at first the conversation was normal. It wasn't much different from any other first-time meeting between a friend's girlfriend and a guy who's trying to make sure she's worthy of their friend trust. I asked her questions about her background, her family, what she liked to do for fun, just basic stuff. She answered everything with ease, and she was warm, engaging. But there was something about the way she spoke. That made me feel like I was being let in on a secret, like there was something deeper beneath the surface. I noticed her glancing at Patrick now and then, her eyes lighting up when he spoke, laughing at his jokes. Patrick was in his element, and I could see the way he was falling for her more with every passing second, but something about this fell off. To me, it was all so perfect, too perfect. It didn't feel natural. It felt rehearsed almost. I let it slide for a moment, choosing to keep things light. But as the conversation went on, I started to pick up little things that made me wonder. When Carrie was telling a story about her past, she mentioned how much she loved hanging out with her ex. There was something about the way she said it, casually, without any real emotion attached. It didn't sound like someone who was truly over their past relationships. At some point, I had to excuse myself. I wasn't feeling right about the whole thing. I went to the bathroom to collect my thoughts, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I couldn't help. But was I just paranoid, or was there something about her that didn't add up? When I came back, I noticed that Carrie's body language had shifted a bit. She was a little closer to Patrick than before, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was a subtle change, but it didn't go unnoticed. I watched the way she looked at him, the way she smiled, and I started to feel like I was intruding in some kind of intimate moment. It made me uncomfortable. I caught her eyes once again, and this time, something in her expression stopped me in my tracks. It was as if she knew exactly what I was thinking, and it wasn't a look of innocence. No, It was the kind of look that made you feel like she could read right through you. We finished our coffee, and the conversation moved toward the usual goodbyes with promises of getting together again soon. Patrick was practically glowing when we left the cafe, and I couldn't help but notice the way Carrie held onto his arm as they walked out together. It was almost like she was claiming him as hers. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I was beginning to see that Patrick wasn't the only one who might have been caught in the middle of something. The question was I going to be able to figure it out, or was I in too deep to notice the truth? The next few days were blur. Patrick was on cloud 9 every time I saw him. He talked about Carrie, how they went out for dinner, how they spent an entire Sunday together, how he was starting to think she might be the one. The way he talked about her was different from any girl he'd mentioned before. I couldn't remember the last time he'd been so serious about someone, and I could tell it meant something to him. But I wasn't feeling the same optimism. The more I thought about it, the more Carrie's behavior started to stick in my mind. The way she'd glance at me when Patrick wasn't paying attention, the subtle flirtations that felt way more intense than what you'd expect from a girl who was supposedly in a committed relationship. I hadn't said anything to Patrick yet. It wasn't my place, right? I was just supposed to be observing. But the longer I kept quiet, the more I realized I wasn't just observing anymore. I was starting to feel something a part of me, hated myself for feeling this way. She was with Patrick, and he was my best friend. He trusted me to do this, to help him to be the guy who made sure everything was good. But what if I was seeing something that didn't really exist? What if I was imagining things? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about her. One night, after a few days of not seeing Carrie, I got a message from Patrick. He said he was going out with her again and that they were meeting up at a bar near the city center. I wasn't busy, so I figured I'd swing by. It wasn't like I had any serious doubts, but I couldn't stop myself from being curious. Something told me I needed to keep an eye on this. I showed up at the bar, try not to make it obvious that I was there to check things out. I found a seat at the far end of the room, ordered a drink, and tried to blend in. Patrick and Carrie were sitting at a table near the window, laughing, talking, completely wrapped up in each other. It was clear from the way they interacted that they were really into each other. Patrick's smile was wide and genuine, and Carrie seemed to be hanging on to every word he said. But then things started to shift as the night went on. I noticed how Carrie was looking around the bar. She wasn't just gazing absent-minded. She was scanning the room, and I could see her eyes linger on a few guys who had walked in. It was subtle, but it didn't escape my notice. At one point, she got up to use the bathroom, and Patrick got lost in his phone. I could see the perfect opportunity to observe a little closer. I grabbed my drink and casually walked by their table. As I passed, I overheard Carrie talking to one of the bartenders. She was laughing too much. If I'm being honest, it was the kind of laugh you give when you're trying to make an impression, trying to be flirty without making it obvious. The bartender didn't seem to mind. He was giving her the same kind of attention. I stopped walking for a moment. Pretending to be looking at the menu, I could feel my heart race. Was this what I was supposed to be looking for? It didn't seem like much, but the little signs were starting to add up. She wasn't giving Patrick her full attention. Carrie came back to the table and slid at her seat next to Patrick. When she looked at him, her expression shifted again. Her smile was less genuine, more forced, and she seemed distracted. Patrick didn't notice he was still too wrapped up in the idea of her, and I couldn't blame him. She was beautiful, smart, and for most part seemed to be everything he was looking for. But I knew I couldn't ignore the little things anymore. I couldn't help myself. I needed to get her alone for a moment. So I went over to the bar to grab another drink, and sure enough, Carrie was there talking to the bartender again. I approached and she noticed me right away. "Hey, Marcus." She greeted me with that familiar smile. "Hey, Carrie," I replied, keeping my tone friendly but guarded. I didn't want to come off as too suspicious or confrontational. "How's everything going tonight?" "Great," she said a little too quickly, "just enjoying the night. You know how it is." Her eyes flicked around the room again, and for a moment I could see a slight unease in her expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I asked if she wanted to join me for a drink, and to my surprise, she agreed. We both stepped away from a bar and found a quieter corner out of Patrick's view. The conversation was casual at first, nothing too personal. But the more we talked, the more I could sense her walls starting to come down. She was being more open, almost too open if I was being honest. She mentioned how she'd been seeing a lot of Patrick recently, how everything seemed so perfect with him, and then, almost as if it was a slip. She told me that there were other guys who'd been interested in her as well, but she wasn't sure what she wanted yet. There it was, the words I've been waiting for, the confirmation that maybe there's something off about her. She wasn't as invested in Patrick as she was letting on. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What was I supposed to do now? Tell Patrick, confronted. I couldn't do it, not yet. I was in too deep. I had to keep playing this game even though the lines were starting to blur. I was supposed to be helping my friend, but now I was the one stuck in the middle of it all. Maybe you'll figure it out, I said, trying to sound casual, but the words didn't come out right. She looked at me and I could see the glint in her eyes. It was as if she knew exactly what I was feeling. Maybe, she said, leaning in just a little too close, and that was when it hit me. I was no longer just checking her out for Patrick. I was checking her out for myself. The next few days were filled with attention. I couldn't shake. I've been lying to myself, pretending that my feelings for Carrie were just a part of the job, part of my obligation to Patrick. But I was fooling no one, especially myself. Every time I saw Carrie, I felt a spark that I hadn't expected. A connection that wasn't supposed to exist, and the worst part, I knew. She felt it too. I could see it in the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Patrick was still wrapped up in his new relationship, talking about how he was planning to take Carrie on a weekend trip, how he wanted to introduce her to his family. He was so happy, so innocent in his belief that things were going perfectly. I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I had seen, what I had heard. How could I? What if I was wrong? What if I was just reading into things? But then there were moments when I couldn't deny the truth anymore, like the other night when Patrick and Carrie invited me out for dinner. I had agreed to join them, but I couldn't focus on the conversation. I kept noticing how Carrie would subtly flirt with me, while Patrick was busy ordering, how her hand would linger on my shoulder when she reached across the table, and the way she would smile at me like there was some shared secret between us. I was starting to feel guilty just for being around her, but I couldn't seem to step back. We were sitting at a cozy table in the corner of the restaurant, the three of us laughing about something, but I couldn't focus. Kiri's leg brushed against mine under the table, and for a moment I could feel my heart racing. She was playing with fire, and I was too caught up in it to pull away. What's going on with you? Marcus, Patrick asked, looking at me with a smile. You seem a little distant tonight. I snapped out of my thoughts and tried to play it off. Nothing. Man, just a little tired. But Carrie was watching me closely, her eyes not as innocent as they once were. It was like she knew that I was holding back, that I was fighting something I didn't want to admit. And in that moment, I realized that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. After dinner, we decided to take a walk around the city, a tradition that three of us had started. It was supposed to be fun, lighthearted, but my mind was elsewhere, the whole walk. Carrie kept sticking close to me, talking to me in a way that felt too intimate. At one point, we found ourselves separated from Patrick, who had stopped to take a call from his mom. It was just the two of us, you know, Carrie said, her voice soft. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I froze, unsure of how to respond. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't tell if I was more afraid of what she might say or of what I might do. What do you mean? I managed to ask, try to keep my voice steady. I mean, she started pausing to look at me. I can't help but feel a connection with you, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's more than just casual. You make me feel alive. Marcus. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing. What was she saying? Was she really telling me this? Did she feel the same pull I did you're with Patrick? I said, my voice a little shaky than I intended. I know, she whispered, stepping closer, but that doesn't change how I feel, and I can't ignore it anymore. I stepped back, trying to create some space between us, but it was hard. The chemistry between us was undeniable. It felt like the universe was conspiring to pull us together, despite the fact that we both knew it was wrong. You should talk to him. I said, my words coming out more like a plea than advice. I will. She said, but her voice was uncertain, as if she wasn't sure herself anymore. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't want to get caught up in this, but deep down, I knew I already was. I was caught in something I couldn't control. Patrick finally caught up with us, and we spent the rest of the evening walking in silence. I couldn't stop thinking about what Carrie said. I couldn't ignore the way she had looked at me, the way she had almost kissed me. The guilt was eating me alive. I wasn't just betraying Patrick as his friend. I was betraying myself. The next few days were a blur of confusion. I couldn't bring myself to confront Carrie about what happened, but I couldn't stop thinking about her every time I saw her. I felt this pull, this magnetic force that kept drawing me in. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional too, and I knew I was in deep. Patrick kept talking about how great things were between him and Carrie, how she was the one. He had no idea that she was starting to drift away from him. No idea that she had already turned to someone else for the kind of attention she was craving, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I couldn't destroy what he had, even though I knew it wasn't real. But the worst part was, I was starting to feel like it didn't matter. I was starting to care more about Carrie than I was willing to admit. That night, after a long conversation with myself, I finally made the decision. I had to see Carrie again. I had to know if this was real or if I was just imagining things. I couldn't live with this uncertainty anymore. I texted her. Can we talk, just the two of us? It's important, she responded almost immediately, of course, and I knew that things were about to change whether I was ready for it or not. I knew the moment I sent that text things would never be the same. I had crossed a line, but now I had to face what I had done. I had to face Carrie and in some ways face myself. It was a quiet evening when I met Carrie at the park. She was already sitting on the same bench where we had shared that moment of tension. Just a few days ago, I could see she was nervous too. Her legs crossed, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, but there was also something else in her eyes. It was almost like she was waiting for me to make a move to say something that would change everything. I walked over to her, trying to keep my composure, but my heart was pounding. The guilt was weighing on me, and I didn't know what I was supposed to say to her, or to myself for that matter. Hey, I said, taking a seat next to her. Hey, she replied softly, her eyes meeting mine. She didn't seem as sure of herself as she had before. There was something in her expression that made me think she too was wrestling with the same thing. So what is this? Carrie? I asked. Getting straight to the point, my voice wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine. When I knew it wasn't what happened the other night, you know what I'm talking about. I can't pretend that it didn't happen. I can't ignore it. She looked away for a moment, biting her lip as if trying to figure out how to respond. I wanted to reach out to her, but I knew that wouldn't help either of us. She needed to speak first to explain what had been going on in her head. Lee don't know, she said, finally, her voice shaky. I guess I just couldn't help myself. I felt something when we were together, and I could tell you did too. But then I started thinking about Patrick and how much I care about him. I don't want to hurt him, Marcus, but I also can't lie to myself about what I'm feeling. 3 let her words sink in. They weren't exactly what I had been expecting, but they made sense. She was caught between 2 worlds, between her loyalty to Patrick and the undeniable connection we had. I understood that feeling all too well. I get it, I said, my voice quieter now. But you have to understand something this. What we have, it's not right. It's not fair to Patrick, and it's not fair to you. You're not being true to yourself. Carrie. Neither of us are. She looked down at her hands, nodding slowly. I know, she whispered. I've been so confused, and I've been feeling like this for a while, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to ruin things with Patrick, but I also didn't want to keep pretending with him. With you, I didn't know what to do. Marcus, I sighed, the weight of it all starting to hit me. You're not the only one. I've been struggling with this too. I shouldn't have let it go this far, but the truth is, I'm not the person who can fix this. I'm not the person who can make the decision for you. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. So what now? The question hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. I had been so focused on the mess we had gotten ourselves into that I hadn't thought about what needed to happen next. But in that moment, it became clear you need to be honest with Patrick. I said, my voice firm now, you need to tell him what you're feeling, because if you don't, this is just going to get worse. And I can't keep playing this game with you. Carrie, it's not fair to him, and it's not fair to either of us. She nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't want to hurt him, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know, I said softly, but you can't keep hiding from the truth. It's only going to hurt more in the long run. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of our conversation pressing down on us. I didn't know what the future held for me, for Carrie, or for Patrick, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep running from the reality of the situation. After a while, Carrie stood up, brushing the dirt off her jeans. She turned to me, a sad smile on her face. Thanks, Marcus, she said quietly, for being honest with me. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. I need to talk to Patrick. I owe him that much. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. There was nothing more to say, nothing more I could do. The decision was hers to make. Now, as she walked away, I felt a heavy sense of finality settle over me. I had done what I needed to do, but that didn't make it easier. I had hurt my friend, I had betrayed him, and I knew that whatever came next, things would never be the same again. The next few days were blur. I didn't hear from Carrie or Patrick, and honestly, I didn't know what I was expecting. I knew that the friendship I had with Patrick was over, and that Carrie and I could never go back to what we had before. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now we all had to face the consequences of our actions. It wasn't until a week later that I finally got a message from Patrick. It was simple, just a text, no explanation, no angry words. I need to talk to you. I didn't know what that conversation would bring, but I knew one thing. It would be the end of this chapter for all of us, and I wasn't sure if any of us would come out of it, and